Weasel. K-R-U-G. Cool. That's really nice.
So this is the second time I've seen it. The first time I saw it, I did not like it at all because I totally bought into the reputation. I was more naive in my, I guess you want to say, I wouldn't say film watching experience. I would say like, what would you call someone who just watches a lot of movies like yourself? Whatever you are. When I was turning into whatever you are,
Uh-huh.
I was a little more naive to these 70s grindhouse movies. So when I saw advertising and I like read things online, I took it at face value. But as you watch more movies, you tend to realize, well, yeah, a lot of this thing is just marketing, and you got to make up your own mind when you see it because you don't know like what is fact from fiction. And I just totally bought into the fact that this was based on a true story and it's so heinous. And then you see all the Keystone Cop stuff, and it just really turned me off, and I hated it because because my expectations were very high. Upon watching it the second time, I liked it a little bit more, but I'm still not a huge fan of it. How many times have you seen this?
I have probably seen it maybe 3 or 4 times in total. I hadn't seen it in several years until today. I do like the movie. I find it very brutal. Um, but the uh, the contrast of those cops, and it's not just the cops bouncing around, but it's the fun banjo music. It just doesn't seem to go along with this film.
Yeah, I think it's folk music, but it's terrible. The soundtrack is just so god
Going
awful.
out on a date for some fresh air and sun. Let's have some fun with those two lovely children and off from as soon as we're
And it
done.
seems like it wasn't just the soundtrack, but they had some original songs, which were also just god awful. I did not like the music in this movie at all. I will say I did like the main song that played. But aside from that, I think the music was just really off-putting. It took you out of a lot of scenes, and it was just really, really, really bad.
I personally, I didn't mind the music. To me, it just when I hear some of that, with the exception of that fun song, when I hear some of that downbeat low song, it just takes me back to that sort of era of films. I've seen a few other films like that. There's a movie called Horror High, also known as Twisted Brain, came out in '74, has a similar type of soundtrack, and I'm very nostalgic for that movie. So it kind of puts me in that mind frame. So I personally don't mind the music. It's not something I'd ever listen to outside of it, but I didn't mind the music myself.
I think it's important that you establish the context of why you like it because it reminds you of other movies like this.
Mm.
I think the reason I don't like it is just because I don't like it in the context of this movie specifically.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't fit, but yeah, I
It's,
get you.
no, it doesn't fit. I did like the road leads to nowhere. That was the one song in there I liked.
And the road leads to nowhere.
Otherwise than that, I didn't like any of the other songs or the music. Let's since we kind of touched base on the tone, let's talk a little bit more about the tone of the movie. It really bounces around a lot from a lot of the genuinely disturbing and creepy stuff that they marketed the movie as, which when that stuff happens, it is genuinely creepy and disturbing. But then they contrast it with all this slapstick Keystone Cops and like funny montages. It just feels like two completely different movies. And you would cut from like something heinous to something that's like a children's movie.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, there's a brutal subject matter here, and there's a lot of nasty stuff going on. And I'm just wondering, were they trying to put in some of that stuff to make it not quite so relentless for 90 minutes? I don't know. I think of like Quentin Tarantino movies. He's pretty violent, but he's got humor peppered in throughout as well. So I'm just wondering, maybe that's what they were kind of thinking. I mean, even like the radio report, when we hear about the escaped prisoners, they talk about how they killed like 2 guards, and they mentioned they also killed a German Shepherd. That's just silly. But I don't know. Even some of the stuff at the very end of the movie in the house when they're slipping and sliding on the shaving cream, and it's a comical thing, kind of, but it doesn't quite fit. But was it there to relax us a little bit? I don't know.
I agree. Like a movie like, let's say, I Spit on Your Grave can seem very relentless. And this, I can see it. Yeah, Quentin Tarantino, he has a way of peppering the humor into his all the dark stuff that he has in his movies. But he does that, and it weaves. This movie doesn't weave. It's just one thing and another. It's like eating, I don't know, pizza. Instead of putting pepperoni on it, you put Nutella on it. It's just like, no, these things do not belong together in the same digestion. So I could see, like, yeah, maybe that they were aiming for that and they maybe didn't execute it that well, maybe. But I'm just commenting on the execution, not the intent.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I think this was Wes Craven's first film that he directed, and Sean Cunningham was the producer. I'm not sure, and I didn't click on him, so I'm not sure what his early work was, but I'm guessing this was probably one of the first things he ever did too. And they laid the groundwork for some of their future stuff, which is they both have good reputations in this genre, at least.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, these guys went on to do great things. Cunningham produced this. He went on later to do the Friday the 13th franchise. Wes Craven first directing, and he later went on to do the Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream franchises. So you're right. These are legends of the genre. This is very early work of theirs. This is not a critique on them or anything like that. Just like specifically talking about this movie itself. But yeah, it's like I said, I liked it a little bit more because I was able to lower my expectations. I knew what was coming. And when you saw the creepy stuff, it was legitimately dark and creepy. It was just off-putting. Like, you would cut from, I think very early on, it started with the best friend, where she gets initially raped, Phyllis, which is a very 70s thing.
Let me give you a little bit of free advice. If you make one peep,
to a slapstick scene where the parents are making like a birthday cake and setting up a birthday party, and Phyllis is getting brutally raped, So they kind of set the tone off, like, right off the bat there. But just to go from like rape scene, death scene, to like the cops are like trying to go on top of a pickup truck with chickens in the back.
Fasten your seatbelt.
Proceed, Ada. Now listen, if you tell any of the boys at the lodge about this, I'm gonna fix you
And they're playing checkers, and they realize, oh my gosh, we just rode past the car with the killers and the girl. Oh my gosh, let's play this Keystone Cop music and let's run to our car. They literally facepalm themselves in that scene, like, oh, like we screwed up. It's just very off-putting. But as far as like the actors, that's another thing that I didn't think worked well. I thought the performances were really bad. You look at these actors, they didn't really go on to do much more after this. Again, you don't want to be too critical because it's a low budget movie and things like that. Krug, David Hess, was really good.
The lead character.
listen to Daddy. Come on. Now, I want you to take the gun. And I want you to turn around. And I want you to put it in your mouth. And I want you to blow your brains out. No, not at me. I want you to take the gun, and I want you to put it in your mouth. And I want you to blow your brains out. No! Blow your brains out! Blow your...
He was far and away the best, and he was just, his character is just slimy, creepy, and believable. That's pretty much all you can say. I didn't care much for his well, it's supposed to be his son, Junior. They probably only 2 years apart in age, but they were supposed to be father and son in this movie.
Yeah. And I think Krug was the inspiration for Freddy Krueger for Friday.
I never thought about that. You could be
Nightmare on
right.
Elm Street. Yeah. I'm just assuming. When I saw the name, I'm like, oh, that's pretty close.
Yeah, you're probably right on. Never thought about that.
That's just a guess, though. I didn't read anything on that, so don't take it.
I didn't either. Yeah, I read a few things about it. Yeah, but I didn't see that.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought he was pretty good as far as the acting goes. I can't really think of anyone else that really stood out to me acting wise. The acting, like I said, was pretty amateurish overall. But he definitely stood out, and he would go on to make a lot of movies like this, where he would play very similar characters like this in other like Italian giallo and other slasher movies.
I think he went on to direct some pornography too. He had like 300 directorial credits or something like that.
No, that's the
Or am I
other
thinking of
guy.
somebody else?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
okay.
the other that's the Weasel character.
Oh,
Fred-
okay.
He directed like 300 porn movies, but I think a lot of them before this. And supposedly, like, he helped out Craven and a lot of the guys on set with the crew as far as setting up shots and things like that, because he had so much experience.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, there was one other actor who went on to several things. One of the cops, Martin Cove, was in Karate Kid, Rambo. He's still acting. I think he's still in that Karate Kid series that's on YouTube or wherever that is. He's been acting forever. So.
Yeah, he went on to probably have the best acting career. But he just didn't have a lot to do in this movie, so I couldn't say he's like good or bad. He just didn't have a lot of material to work with. But yeah, this was actually, obviously, we talked about this before when we did other Grindhouse movies, that the based on a true story thing is kind of all bunk. This was actually based on The Virgin Spring, which was a 1960 movie that dealt with the same type of setup. And you could really tell, like, they try to force the plot lines from The Virgin Spring into this. Like, maybe they used it as like the main plot material, and then they went in their own directions. But a lot with The Virgin Spring is kind of like, you find the pendant that the father gave to the daughter. The Virgin Spring, it worked well because, again, they wrote that in a specific way, and it was based on like an old ballad. This being based on The Virgin Spring, the whole finding of the peace necklace that the father gives the daughter seems really contrived because it's so generic. Like a peace necklace in the 70s, like, wouldn't like a lot of people have that?
Presumably, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't very distinctive or anything, and that was like a big plot device in the story there. And the fact that the parents, or, you know, with The Virgin Spring, it was the father ends up killing the killers. I think that movie worked better because the father was the main character. Here it seemed kind of odd because the girls are getting tortured, and then the parents, we just saw them as slapstick characters. Suddenly they're this middle-aged couple are like sadistic killers. Did you find that off-putting at all, or do you think it worked in the context of the story?
I didn't find it believable at all. For one thing, they didn't seem, I'm sure they were upset that their daughter was dead, they didn't seem as upset as I think they should have been. And they seemed pretty calm, actually, especially even when they were dealing with Krug in the living room and such. I didn't see the rage in him that I would assume there should be in that situation.
Yeah, their actions, what they did with the revenge, dictates a level of emotion that we just didn't see in the characters at all.
Right.
To make that transition from, you know, loving middle-aged couple to like sadistic killers, it just seemed really jarring and implausible.
I did, however, like the scene where she bit the one guy's dick off. You don't see that very often in these types of films. Again, I find it hard to believe that she could have set that up and be so calm about it, but I did like the payoff.
It was a very good scene, and it's one of the more memorable scenes in the movie. But again, like, the setup of it's like, okay, I'm gonna start sucking the dick of the guy who raped and killed my daughter, just so I could bite it, and then
If
it's
you're gonna
good to
go
look
that
at.
route, do it right away. Don't let it last. She let it
I
last a
know,
while.
I know. It's like I don't know. I don't. Again, I don't want to be too critical. The scene itself to work if you just didn't put too much thought into it. But like I said, this movie, for me, it was a lot better than the first time I saw it. If you just focus on the stuff that the movie pitches itself as this gruesome movie, if you focus on those scenes and you ignore the music that plays throughout those scenes, like there was like a love ballad that played while the two girls were being forced to like one had to pee on herself, and then they were forced into having lesbian sex. And this is brutal and it's torture, but then they play a love ballad song, which is just like, what are you doing, filmmakers?
Someone who understands.
Come on.
Yeah, it didn't fit.
No, it didn't fit. It didn't fit at all. But yeah, so what are your overall thoughts on the film?
Overall, I enjoyed it. Again, it's one of those films that obviously had a reputation for many years, and I think the first time I saw it, I had the similar reaction where I was a little disappointed by it, but it has grown on me over the years. Just there's a certain realism that I take from it when I see some of the brutal scenes. I mean, it like even the stabbing, it seemed realistic. It's not over the top Hollywood. It was very quick and to me believable, so, and that's brutal. That's very, very brutal to just do that. Yeah, I like the film. Not a perfect film, but I did enjoy it.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd say that it's not perfect, but there are elements there that are good. If you're a fan of Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, or Cunningham or Wes Craven, then this is a good like time capsule to see their early work. The gruesome stuff is gruesome. Although I complained about the music, The Road Leads to Nowhere is actually a pretty good song that's on there. So I would say middle of the road for me, and I guess you would give it a thumbs up. I give it a
I would
thumbs in the
definitely give
middle.
it a thumbs up. Yeah. I'm looking at on IMDb. They have a pretty good Metacritic review of this one. I think it was in the 60s, which anything above 60 gets a green color. This has a 68. So even the critics seem to like this one to a certain degree.
To a certain degree, like IMDb is a lot kinder to it than Rotten Tomatoes. I think the fans gave it like 40 something, low 40s, and the critics gave it low 60s.
Mhm.
So it's middle of the road to good, depending on your perspective. So
Yeah, and I got to give a little shout out because most films like this are not liked by critics. So if you get one that's liked by critics, even if it's not a fantastic liking, but a little bit of liking, it's got to be decent in my opinion.
that's a good point. I'm sure like all the other movies made in this genre weren't exactly praised, let's say. Even though was it Roger Ebert? Which one? Ebert and Robert. Roger Ebert was the fat one, right?
Correct.
He actually liked
No,
it.
yeah. Did he?
He liked it, yeah. He gave it positive reviews. And he hated well, he didn't hate, he didn't like Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
He hated I Spit on Your Grave too. I
Yeah.
read his book years ago, and I think that was like the worst film he ever saw. He said something like that. He also, by the way, I watched a movie yesterday called Massacre at Central High from 1976, which Roger Ebert apparently put it in his top 10 of the year, which is basically a horror slasher film from 76. A good movie. I like it a lot. And he liked that one too.
Yeah, it's surprising the movies he likes and he doesn't like. I mentioned I interviewed John Dugan, who played the grandfather in Texas Chainsaw. He actually became friendly with Ebert and when they would see each other. So, but yeah, the movies he would like and not like, definitely a different era. Not only this movie, but the era of critics having an influence on the movies you watch. Because for me, when I was younger, I couldn't see a lot of the 80s horror movies because I was too young. So the only thing I would see from them is clips of Siskel and Ebert.
Right.
And they would hate all these movies and I'd be forced to watch them because that's the only place I could see clips of R-rated movies,
Right,
So,
right. Yep.
yeah.
I had an advantage. I was very young in the 80s, but I had I should say my mom had a coworker who loved horror movies. and I liked horror movies. Not that I'd seen a bunch, but we had cable by that point. So she would take me to movies. I saw like The Howling, American Werewolf in London, Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D, and Ghost Story. Anything that was out at that time, it was a horror, we would go see it. So I really lucked out. I was like in 4th grade or something, and I was seeing these R-rated movies in the theater, and I was the envy of everybody. So it was awesome.
Yeah. I would just get to hear stories from people like you about how cool it was. So, the 2 movies that really stood out to me that I'd hear stories about for years before I actually saw it was the first Child's Play movie, and it was the Jason Takes Manhattan. I think that was the name of
Right,
the
about
Manhattan one.
1988 or so.
Yeah, that one,
87, 88.
because I heard so many people talk about how cool it was when Jason punched that guy's head off. You know, I was like, oh my
That's
god,
the best scene in the movie.
yeah. So, but yeah, this era, people don't have to hear stories. All these movies are easily accessible. So, take my opinion for what it's worth. Check it out yourself, and yeah, we'll come at you guys again next week.
I will, Daddy.
Hey, no bra?
Of course not. Nobody wears those anymore.
Nobody except us drill sergeants.
Yeah, but look, Estelle, you can see her nipples as plain as day.
Daddy, don't be so clinical.